Let's talk a little bit about going from a decimal to a fraction, and from a fraction to a decimal. One of the most important things about going from a decimal to a fraction is you really have to understand place value. If you have a hard time understanding place value, you're going to have a hard time understanding fractions, or going from a decimal to a fraction. I apologize. So my first decimal number that I have is 0 3/10. When going from a decimal to a fraction, we are taking our decimal number and it's going to become our numerator. So my decimal is 3. That becomes my numerator of the 3. And then I have to know what place value that 3 is in. This 3 is in the tenths place. So my denominator would be a 10. 3/10, 3/10. The next number is 0 42/100. My number 42 would go to my numerator. The 2 in 42 is in the hundredths place, so my denominator is 100. See why it's important to know place value? If we thought this was the tenths place and put that 10 down here, that would not be correct. So we have 42 hundredths, 42 hundredths. Now let's look what to do if we have a whole number with a decimal. So I have 3 75 hundredths. My whole number becomes a whole number. 75 in my decimal place becomes my numerator. The 5 and 75 is in my hundredths place, so my denominator is 100. I now have a mixed number of 3 75 hundredths, and this would be read as 3 75 hundredths as well. Same thing here. I have a whole number 1 here, so I'll have a whole number 1 here. I have 367 in my decimal places, so 367 will be my numerator. The 7 and 367 thousandths is in the thousandths place, so my denominator is 1,000. 1 and 367 thousandths, 1 and 367 thousandths. Just because you've gone from decimal to fraction does not mean that these are in the lowest, simplest forms. You may have to take this step a little bit farther and simplify it later on if necessary. If you need help with simplifying fractions, there is a video on my channel for that as well. All right, now let's talk about going from a fraction to a decimal. Going from a fraction to a decimal, we're going to use some division, because remember, when we look at this number, this bar is a division bar, so I really have 3 divided by 4. I always tell my kids to flick the top number into the house, and I'm dividing by the outside number. I always told them, think about you flicking your brother or sister, and they run inside to tell on you, and you're staying outside because you know you're in trouble now. Anytime I divide, I write my division steps down. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. 4 divided by 3 will not work, so you could either automatically put a 0 up there. 4 times 0 is 0. Oops. Yes, that's right. When I subtract, I get 0. Remember, I do not want a remainder. So what do? I'm able to add a decimal point and a 0. That does not change the value. Once I add my decimal point here, I'm bringing it up, and then I'm going to bring down my 0. After I bring down, I'm going to start back over. 4 will go into 30 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. When I subtract, I get 2. I still have a remainder, and I don't want a remainder. So I'm able to add another 0, bring down the 0, start over. 4 can go into 25 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, I get 0. I don't have a remainder, and I have nothing else to bring down, so 3/4 is equal or equivalent to 0 75 hundredths. The next example we'll do is 3/10. We're going to flick my top number into the house, divide by 10. Anytime I divide, I write my steps down. I'm looking at how many times 10 can go into 3. It cannot go in. I'm going to go ahead and add a 0. 0 times 10 is 0. After I multiply, I subtract. I have a remainder. I don't want a remainder. So I'm going to add a decimal point and a 0. That does not change the value there. After I add the 0 in my dividend, I add it in my quotient. After I bring the decimal point up, I bring down my 0. After I bring down, I start back over. 10 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 10 is 30. Subtract, I get 0. I have a remainder of 0, so I know I'm done. So 3/10 is equal or equivalent to 0 3/10. All right, now let's look at what we do with a mixed number. When I have a mixed number and I want to change it to a decimal, I must first go from a mixed number to an improper fraction. Remember, to do that, I multiply my whole number times my denominator and add it to my numerator. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 2 is 10. So I have 10 and 4 tenths. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I have 10 over 4. Now I'm going to flick that top number into the box. 4 will be on the outside. Anytime I divide, I write my steps down. Four goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. I subtract, I get 2. I do not want a remainder, so I can add a decimal point and a 0. Bring the decimal point up into my product, or my quotient. Bring down my 0. When I bring down, I start over. 4 goes into 25 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, I get 0. Two and 2/4, or 10 over 4, is equal or equivalent to 2 and 5/10. 4 and 2/5. I need to first take this mixed number and I need to change it to an improper fraction. To do that, I take the whole number, multiply it by my oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Take the whole number and multiply it by my denominator, add it to my numerator. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 2 is 22. My denominator, say, is a 5. Now I'm going to flick this top number into the house. Divide by my denominator. Anytime I do a division problem, I write my steps down. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. 5 goes into 22 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract, I get a 2. I do not want a remainder, so I add a decimal point and a 0. The decimal point goes up into the quotient. Bring my 0 down. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Get a remainder of 0. So 4 2/5, or 22/5, fifths is equal or equivalent to 4 4/10.